It is January 2nd, and I already ran into, oh my gosh, the last 2 days problems, and all self inflicted. So I have been working on that fuchsia raspberry pullover, the basic v neck sweater that I've been working on. And it's coming along actually pretty fast. I'm at the sleeves and it was working up fast. And I remember one or two rows feeling like when I turned the work, something didn't feel right. And I was like, I'm just overthinking it. Or maybe I just made the connecting stitch a little bit too loose. So I kind of ignored it instead of, looking at my work and making sure it makes sense. And I think when I was undoing and untwisting it, because like when you get to the sleeve, it gets really awkward. I untwisted it too much, and then instead of actually turning it, I was working in the same direction, and then I could see two separate spots where the pattern didn't match how the body was. So I had to rip out like probably a good 8 inches when I was like, it's gonna bug me because it was not super obvious. I knew it would bug me just enough that I went ahead and decided to go back and fix it, which didn't take that long. But then I'm like, I could have gotten like this sweater pretty much almost done today. Well, yesterday. And it's fine. And then also, I had this thought last night where I was like, I feel like to make the grayling sweater, and actually I really want to make the V-neck version. I think I forgot there was a V-neck version until it kind of came up when I went to like just straight up Google it instead of going through Ravelry, which I'm kind of glad I did that. So I did want to do the V-neck version. And I remember thinking when I ordered the yarn that it didn't seem like a ton of yarn to order based on the Ravelry description of how much yarn you need. But then I'm like, I'm overthinking it. And I knew these were 50-gram balls of Wonder Fluff that Knit Picks has. And I know they do that a lot, which is actually kind of good in a way. So that way you're not stuck with, if you're kind of in between, if you need like say 6 and 7 skeins, you're not stuck with a ton of that last skein. So kind of I appreciate it. And I knew that. And I thought I was buying extra just out of an abundance of caution because that's just, I don't know, that's just what I'm always going to do anyway. Because I'm tall and I tend to want, longer sleeves and stuff like that. So I underthought it. And then I remembered making a comment on AKA Nora Knits, her podcast, where one of the ones that she was talking about her ranunculus that she had knit. And I remembered saying something like, oh, I want to see if there's something in stash because I keep going back and forth on whether or not I actually want to make a ranunculus, but it's not a high priority. But if I have stash, maybe I'll make it. And actually I started thinking like, oh, there is something that if I rip it out and reclaim the yarn and, straighten it out, steam it out, all that stuff, I would actually probably use that. And she replied and said, if it helps, it doesn't actually use that much yardage. So between that and underthinking this, so for some reason I had it in my mind last night to go back to that, the pattern page in Ravelry. Of course, the yarn already shipped, so cool. They're working really fast. Awesome. It's already in, the next step in the shipping process. I read the grams of yarn as yardage, which is so way off. Way, way off. Oh my gosh. I still cannot believe I did that, and that my internal monologue said, yeah, that's fine. And I don't know if I just saw it because like it's a chunky weight and it didn't look like it's a particularly tight gauge, but then I was like, but that's heavily cabled and cables will chew up a little bit more yarn. And then I'm like, but these are 50-gram balls. I really need to I'm really glad I had that thought. So now I'm torn on this whole, do I go ahead and try and place an order as quickly as possible and try to get more of that die lot or a similar die lot? Or do I wait for it to come in and then put in the notes of, the comments, like you can add a memo to your order and then request like, hey, can you make sure if there's any of this die lot left that I get that and anything as close as possible if needed? I don't know what's wrong with me the last couple days. I'm so like, am I the only one that does stuff like this? Like, I don't know. And granted, like I haven't done anything like that stupid, for lack of a better word, in a really long time. But I'm just like, seriously, Holly, you know better. And like, I feel like lately I just cannot read. And it's not just with knitting or crochet or any of that stuff. Like lately, the amount of silly little things that I've done because I just can't seem to read is a serious, like, I don't know. So needless to say, I went ahead and put the additional yarn in my cart, and I don't know. Because it's supposed to be here in 5 days, which really isn't that long, but then I'm like, okay, but I don't know how many people are ordering it because it's, I'm sure, a popular thing and it's on sale, so I'm sure other people are buying the yarn. So, conversely, I could just order all one. I'm just thinking of this now in the moment. I could just order all the yarn I need in one go and return the rest of it. And then how do I track that for my intended spend, for budgeting? Because certainly if I would have realized this back in, 2024, because all of you were so kind and let me off the hook of like, no, you still have the $100 for 2025 first quarter. Makes sense. But now do I count what the additional yarn is? But then I would have spent that in 2024 to make sure I would have had all of it. The mental gymnastics of this. So I'm wondering if that's maybe the best way to go about this, because there is such a risk of not getting all one die lot, is maybe just order all of it again and then return the other. But I've never returned anything to Knitpick, so I don't know how that process goes. So I guess I will look into the return policy and have a think on it and let you know what I end up doing. I cannot believe it is nearly halfway through January and I've been working on stuff and not pulling out the camera for one reason or another, whether it's just too dark in the evening or whatever. And then sometimes I would be working on stuff thinking it would be pretty mundane, and then things would happen, and in the moment I would just have to like try to figure it out. I have been leaning pretty crochet heavy for probably the last year or so, but also going through all of my works in progress at the beginning of January kind of also sparked the, oh hey, you like knitting too, right? Because I didn't mean to abandon it, it just kind of happened. So I have actually made way more progress and gotten more finished up than I thought I would, because I intended to just kind of spread it out here and there and just finish things as I finish them, still allow myself to cast on new projects if I so choose, but also just kind of mixing in some sort of alternating system and making sure like I'm still giving attention to longer term projects that I really want to get off the needles and finally enjoy or the hook. So if this isn't our first time hanging out and you've watched a few of my videos, you might already know that this one has been on the hook for a little while. I want to say somewhere around August. This is the basic V-neck sweater. I actually haven't fully tried it on yet, other than to take that thumbnail photo from before, like, I finished the sleeves and everything, which I could tell it was going to fit just fine. It is a little bit larger on me than I would have preferred, and that's simply because I am losing weight and I didn't want to go too far down on size. So I kind of compromised, and so I've lost 25 pounds so far. So this is fitting a little bit bigger, but I also accepted that that was something that could happen. And also, being that this is an acrylic, I also wanted to be able to play with, well, back in the day, we used to call it killing the acrylic, and that was like a thing you didn't want to do, but I actually kind of enjoyed doing that when it was like so not popular, by holding an iron or steam, like especially with the steam setting, and kind of giving it a more of a drapey feel. So as I continue to lose weight, that is something I am totally willing to try on this project and see if adding more drape in that will hug my body differently or make it more tunicky, if it will help add a length. Anyway, I'm super happy with this project and how it turned out, how it ended up fitting. I will say there are a few things I struggled with, especially the more I kept going on. So at one point, I realized when I had it like laying flat, and I think you can kind of see it here, if I hold that up, where somewhere along the way I'd lost one or two of these clusters in the Trinity stitch. I don't know what happened, and luckily putting a ribbing on it really masked that. And then to compensate for that, what I did for the shoulders is I made sure it lined up perfectly for where you would want to pick up for the sleeves. And then I just adjusted how I seamed it up, and then would occasionally on the side that was a little bit longer, it would actually be on the back, I would just occasionally skip a spot that I would normally grab for the seam, and that worked out very well in my opinion. The other thing I'm glad I did on this is, and this was a little bit of a frustration with the pattern, is that I ended up picking up the sleeve on the cast-on edge, chain edge. It's so hard when you go back and forth between the two different crafts and whatever. So what I mean to say is the chain edge, and I'm really glad I did that, because one thing that she did not mention in her pattern, and I only saw it by virtue of just looking at one of her other patterns, is that she prefers, instead of the classic way that you would come across your chain as you're working your first row, that she picks up that underside bar, which I do agree does make a nice edge. And I almost did that for this project, but it didn't say explicitly to do that. So then by the time I had these free chain edges to pick up for the sleeves, I couldn't quite tell which direction to go in. And if you look closely enough, you can see where there's a little bit of, I don't know, like an interrupt in the pattern. I don't mind that because it does look like a classic shoulder seam. So that was fine. And I'm glad I noticed I was going the wrong way in pattern for this, because then on the other sleeve where I had the distinct chain, well, the tops of the chains from the last row, I went the wrong way on that as well to also mimic that same pattern interrupt and have it look a little bit like a seam. So I'm really glad I picked the original chain edge. And I originally did that because I was like, that's just the one I'm not looking forward to. So if I get it out of the way now, then when I'm really wanting to hit the home stretch and get on this sleeve, it's just going to go so much easier. So glad I did that, if for no other reason than now both sides have like a shoulder seam. So that was a little bit disappointing from the pattern standpoint. The other thing that I found disappointing was I did end up purchasing the pattern so I could just take it with me and, mark off and everything. I don't enjoy leaving an iPad open forever and then having to constantly charge it and I just want paper and pencil or pen or whatever and just work on my pattern, especially for longer projects. For something small, it's fine. I'll deal with it. But I bought the pattern thinking, well, I don't love it in blog form, but it really wasn't formatted that much better in the PDF form. So I was a little bit disappointed in that. I think it could have been done a little bit better. Again, some of those notes that, would have made a huge difference in how this worked up. Again, I don't mind it. I actually kind of like that it gave this little bit of like that faux seam in a way. So it ended up being just fine. But if that's something that would bother you, that's just something to keep in mind. I will say I did like her instructions on how to do ribbing and everything. I think everything worked out pretty well. There was a little bit of drama in the first sleeve in that I don't know what my problem was other than I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like making progress and I have a chance at getting this done very quickly. And I think a few times, because this is actually back and forth, not all the way, spirally in the round. I don't know if that just made sense, but you actually join and then turn your work to make this specific pattern. I think there were times where when I went to go untwist it, I untwisted it one turn too far. And I really was trying to make sure I was making sure I was going in the opposite directions of the top chains of the last round of stitches. And somehow I still, in several spots, I eventually was looking down and going, something doesn't seem right, because it kind of seemed like this. And that's how I caught this, actually. It was only because I had made that mistake in 2 other spots that I realized that's what was going on. And it wasn't just, my eyes are playing tricks on me. So I ripped it all back, because as much as I don't mind some imperfection in it, I was like, well, but when I get to this one, then do I make the same mistakes, except that they were in like completely uneven spots, and then it was just like, just rip it back. It really doesn't take that much longer to go ahead and fix the mistake for the amount of time I've worked on this in general and the amount of wear I'll get out of it. Not a big deal. I guess in a way I'm glad I made the mistake, so that way then my eyes were trained to see the mistake and then see how there's this little bit of an interrupt in that fabric. So I had that going for me, and that's just something to watch out if you do decide to make this pattern. I don't think that the price of the pattern was really that terrible. It was just a little bit disappointing to go, oh, I was hoping this was going to be a little bit more cleaned up, and I didn't really feel like it was. So that is that. Finally off the hook after, I don't care how much time. I'm not going to be someone that tracks the full amount of time, because if you saw the video where I went through all my works in progress, they go back to at least 2014. And I don't even know if that's the oldest work in progress in Limbo from my Ravelry page. I haven't checked. I'm almost afraid to, but even 2014, to have something that's been 11 years on the needles, like it's time to finish this stuff or get rid of it. And that one I'm actually going to go ahead and rip it out. But all that to say is I'm glad I'm making this effort, because it is starting to feel better. And now I have this hexagon cardigan, which, there was a little bit of drama with that and getting the yarn. In that when you go to Premiere, well, they changed how the chart is, but I'll put up the chart that I was using at the time that they had up on their website of how to coordinate the yarns. And let me tell you, the sage that I went against my better judgment and purchased to go along with this to make the ribbing, because I wanted a solid ribbing. I really thought it would be a good match for some of these sagey green colors, and that maybe it was just my computer screen and I was overthinking it. However, when I got the actual sage green yarn, it was not even a matter of like, oh, it's a little bit of a different dye lot. Like, no, those yarns do not go together. So, I don't know who came up with that chart, but not great. Anyway, the last time that I showed this in a vlog was pretty much that I had just ordered this gray yarn, which, spoiler alert, it did come in. It came in way faster than the sage green, which kind of not surprising, because when I ordered the sage green, it was like probably the height of Christmas and holiday shopping. So like early December, not the best timing, but also they were pretty, I don't want to say generous, but like they made sure you knew it might take a while. And so it did come like a fuzz sooner than when they projected, which I still would rather have that happen than have it be the other way around. And then I'm waiting on something that I thought I was supposed to get days ago, because there was at one point in the shipping process where it was going to do that. And then it was back to almost the original shipping time. So for this, I paid the $5.99, I believe it was, to order the solids off of the Walmart Plus app. Well, it's the Walmart app. I just happen to have the Plus. So I did the $5.99 shipping because otherwise I'd have to go to Premier and order like $75 worth of yarn, which, as much as I would like to do that, my bank account says, no, please don't. And I'm trying to get better about spending needlessly, especially on yarn. So I just went ahead, paid the shipping. And then it said, okay, well, it's going to come January 10th. And then, but if you want to pay $9.99, it'll come sooner on January 9th. So, you know, really super expedited, as you can tell. It actually came, I want to say December 27th or 28th, like way sooner than I expected. So, I mean, cool. I'm not mad about that at all. Obviously, that's great. All the gifts in the mail probably kind of caught up at that point. So it worked out pretty well. And I did go ahead and I did the rolled, well, it's the tubular cast off. Well, okay, let me back up a little bit more. I decided I wanted knit ribbing on this particular garment because I wanted a bomber look, and to have it be like, almost like, I'm thinking of those like satin bomber style jackets that like maybe your grandfather had, or, you know, someone where, I don't know, it's a satin bomber jacket that they probably got from the VFW or their workplace or something like that with some sort of logo on it. I don't know why, other than I think I saw this kind of bomber-y look on someone else, and I'm leaning towards the Faded Wildflower crochet that had done, well, she did the crocheted ribbing, but the way she did it, it had that bomber feel. And I'm like, I kind of actually really like that. And it's not like anything I have in my closet, but it's not such a huge stretch from my personal style that I'm not going to want to wear it. So I decided I wanted to knit it. And I think I ended up using initially the same needle size in millimeter as I did for the hook on the actual crochet body. And I actually had a moment as I was picking up for the ribbing where I went, let me just make sure. And so I probably only knit to about here and then started going back and forth just to see how the ribbed fabric would look. I didn't go as far as to actually do the full tubular bind off or anything like that. I had a chance to pick up this hexagon cardigan now that the fuchsia pullover is done. And instead of taking a chance and going all the way across the bottom edge with the ribbing, I kind of wanted to swatch a little bit and see if I like this ribbed fabric or if I wanted to go any smaller or larger on the needle size. So I thought that was a really good choice. So that way I wasn't stuck or had like a ton to rip out or anything like that. I think doing this little 1x1 ribbing swatch kind of helped. I think doing a 5mm needle, or US size 8, which was the same as the hook I used to crochet, was a 5mm H hook. I think this would have been a perfectly fine ribbing as is, but because I only did this swatch, I think I will go down to a 4.5mm needle. And the other thing is, because I hadn't knit in a while and hadn't done any ribbing in particular, is I kind of forgot this edge is going to be a little bit ugly. So it gave me the opportunity to review a few of the videos on how to clean up your edges and see which one I like the best. So I'm going to play around with it. I'm going to go ahead and just rip it out and then go ahead and pick up all the way across the bottom, and then I'll do the cuffs for last. And I know because I'm testing this out, you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, why didn't you do the cuff first? But I wanted to get the part that was going to be, well, essentially the longest out of the way and kind of just taper down. So that way when I get to the cuffs, it feels like there's almost nothing left. The other thing is I did decide I am definitely doing a tubular bind off. I did find a good resource to remind myself how to do that. I really just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get, completely disproportionate ribbing for the fabric. And honestly, if I had stuck to that particular needle size, it would have been fine. But I did feel like I had room to go down a needle size. So I did do that, and I didn't even bother swatching for that part. I just went ahead and picked up evenly, which was a whole other project because because I had the center seam to go off of, I was able to just make sure I had the same number of stitches on this side as I did on this side, and I probably spent more time on making sure they're even than anyone would ever notice, but I know it would bother me. The other thing I noticed is this is the wrong side of the fabric, but I actually kind of like this effect. However, by the time I had knit down a little bit and realized, hey, that would have been a cool treatment to actually pick up on the wrong side and have this kind of edging on it, I didn't feel so strongly about it that I wanted to rip it out and redo all of everything I had just picked up and made sure was even and everything like that. So I went ahead and did it this way. But I think in the future, if I either make another one of these hexagon cardigans or something similar, and I do this kind of picked up ribbed hem, and I pick up for ribbing like I did on this one, I think I might actually do this kind of, I don't know. I don't even know how to call this edge. It just looks really neat. Also, I forgot to drop down my needle size on the cuffs, which, so you can see, it's not a big deal. And by that I mean I forgot to drop down for the tubular cast off, bind off portion of that. And it does flare out a little bit. I don't think it bothers me, and I noticed it on the first cuff, but again, I had been going along and I didn't notice so much flaring out that it was going to bother me. And also because it's going to be on my wrists, it would give me a little bit more of that stretch and comfort for that. So I didn't, again, feel strongly enough about it to go back and rip it out. So yeah, there's plenty of going on with that. There was something else with the tubular bind off. If you ever go to do a tubular bind off, pretty much every tutorial is going to tell you about 4 times the length of whatever you're binding off. Now, I didn't know if that meant this length as it is in ribbing, sucked in, or like if it wouldn't have been sucked in. And then, so they're like, well, you can never have too much yarn to go ahead and do that sewn part of the bind off at the very end. And I can tell you, it is absolutely possible, because then it is going to constantly get tangled on itself and around everything else around you. And then you'll get the knot where your tail is. Like, don't do like 6 or 7 times the length of your garment. I had so much left over after that. And the amount of frustration of any time it would like kind of ball up and knot on itself, no matter how well I thought I was like managing the strands and laying them out nicely, because I was getting to that point at one point. It was just so not worth it. The other thing is, once you commit to doing that tubular bind off, especially at that bottom edge, just go with it. I think I stopped at one point thinking like, maybe if I get a snack, I'm going to feel better, and then I'll just continue on. And I ended up having to unsew a portion to figure out what the heck I had messed up, because something definitely didn't look right. I couldn't figure it out. Just be prepared to spend a good chunk of time on that bottom band if you do decide to do a tubular bind off, and go into it knowing you're probably not going to take any breaks, to be honest. That would be my best advice on that, at least. Anyway, at least it's done, and I get to actually wear it and enjoy it. So super happy about that. And now I have 2 new garments to wear, and I finally get to enjoy them. This actually was on the hook since about last fall. I want to say last August or September is when I bought the yarn, and presumably I started it right away. And that was just by going back through my Walmart receipts. So the other thing, I didn't put this in my goals for 2025, but It was only because I didn't think of it at the time. It was just something as I was working on these and finishing these up, I realized another goal that I have been working on, and I noticed even in the fall I'm trying to get really a lot better about, is weaving in ends as much as possible as I go. There are times where like a particular project will say don't weave it in right away, but just making sure as soon as I do that bind off or the last chain and, you know, that little finishing, that I'm going ahead and sewing in all the ends and doing it on, you know, as nice of a job as humanly possible. I know in the past that's something I have struggled with in doing, and then I would be like, but it's finished. And like I have that shawl where I was like, oh, it's a finished object, but I mean, it's not. I have it marked that way in Ravelry, but there's all these ends, it's not blocked. These two projects I don't think need to be blocked, so I'm not counting that in needing to do that. If I do decide to kill the acrylic and block the fuchsia I don't know why I keep saying it's a cardigan. It's a pullover. The fuchsia pullover, that's just something to play with. And I actually still have my swatches for this particular project, so I might just play around with, you know, the steamer and the swatches and see what I like, if anything. But anyway, so that is a goal that I'm really trying to get a lot better about, because then if I have the ends hanging out, I'm not going to reach for it in my closet, obviously. Like, I'm getting up, I suck at mornings, I'm not going to grab that. And I might think to myself, oh, I'll do that tonight. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm not going to remember it needs to be done. So I'm doing a lot better at just, you know what? I'm probably already watching something on TV, so let's just take the time, weave in the ends. It really genuinely, even when I have a decent amount of ends to weave in, it doesn't take that long. You just have to do it. And I know it's like probably our least favorite thing to do, but it is so worth it to do it right then and there. Other things I have been working on are, I did finish all 6 of those pumpkins. I don't know if you can see them here. There is one where it was kind of ribbed and I was struggling to get it stuffed and have like the ribbing come out. So what I ended up doing is I did do a full soak block on it. And this is something I'm actually kind of curious if you have any suggestions. I ended up using a trick that I've done before in the past, and that is when I was at Dollar General, I just picked up a cheap pack of balloons, blew one up, and then I was able to shape the wet fabric around it and keep those ribs kind of stretched out for that like pumpkin-y look. I also have a small latex sensitivity, which blowing up one small balloon, I'm not going to feel that. But in general, like, I hate buying balloons because I know kind of like just how they are to the environment, but it does make a nice like hat shaping, or, well, in this particular, a pumpkin shaping. So I would love to know if you have any suggestions when you have something where you want to do that nice rounded blocking. If you have anything that you use either around the house, or if you've found any tools on Etsy or anything like that. I genuinely don't know, because I've only ever used balloons. I just don't want to anymore, which granted, I just picked up the pack of balloons and I'm kind of stuck with those for a little bit, but looking for better options. Now, don't think I've been all good and only working on some of these lingering works in progress. So there's 6 pumpkins back there, these 2 garments, and then I did go ahead and fix the finish around my doormat. So having 9 of the WIPs completely done and off my mind feels amazing. But also, I took off this last week of work because, well, I work for a small department and we can't both be out during all of the holidays, and I don't mind taking off in January, to be honest, so it just works out. And so I've been working on some other stuff, as you can see. This was born out of, I went to go order paper towels. And the brand that I would normally order paper towels from, at least in Walmart, it's a pretty good, sturdy pack of towels. It's the Viva brand. And it went from something like $1.97 per roll to $3.78. So not quite double, but not far from double. And that really bothered me, and I knew I had leftover cotton from both the doormat and just other random things. And I don't necessarily love working with cotton, but there is a utility for cotton. So I have been stash diving and working on all sorts of little dish rags, things to just mop up the counters or whatever. So, you know, something spills. I just have one or two little things. I wanted different sizes for that reason. So if it's a small spill, I just use one of them, and then, you know, just whatever I had left. And then I'm just playing with different stitches. A lot of these are linen stitch. This one is, maybe it was another Trinity stitch. I did mean to do a star stitch on one, and I just don't think I've started it yet. So working through some cotton. Additionally, the other thing that I hate buying replacements are the Swiffer, well, anything for the Swiffer, which actually is right behind me because, you know, I was making sure the size was okay. I do have a lot of these ends to weave in. These won't take that long. So even though I was just saying like, hey, I'll get better at weaving ends as I go, because I've just kind of been working on these sporadically, I'll just make one effort of going through all the ends. But anyway, I'm making Swiffer pads, and I did this largely because I do have, it's a store-bought, like a dishcloth or towel or something, where I was like, but I want to clean the floors really fast and just spritz them down and then go over them with the Swiffer. And because it's got those little grippy things in the head of the Swiffer, I had just kind of wrapped it around and, you know, poked in there. And honestly, it worked out just fine. So I figured, well, I could do something similar. I did make so that I could actually, you know, tie them together for a little bit more security, just in case that doesn't quite work out. I'm going to just play around with which styles I like, if I prefer to be able to tie them in several spots, or if I would just prefer to make it longer and then, you know, divot my fingers into those little grippy things. Let's see what else we have going on. Super productive week. It's only been because I've been off of work. And honestly, I wasn't even that productive for having a week off. I did plenty of vegging and sleeping in, trust me. I did decide to go ahead and do a knit dishcloth. I want to say this is the moss stitch in knitting, where it's like you knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and then you match that for the next row, and then you do the opposite for 2 more rows, and then you flip-flop. So that's all. And then I pulled this out a few times where I didn't mind spending the effort and bandwidth to pay attention to the chart. I feel like I'm doing a little bit better on not quite internalizing the stitch pattern in the chart, because it is charted both back and forth. It's not like you have a row of purls of just not thinking, and, you know, you can watch TV for that purl row or whatever. And I'm usually pretty good at reading my knitting and being able to see where the last row is and figuring out what should come next. I think because it is a 10-row repeat, part of it is like it's just not internalizing super well. Also, the other thing is this is a much fuzzier fabric, and the tweed on it, it's going to be absolutely beautiful and gorgeous and everything like that. However, I think it's just making it a little bit harder for me to read it as I'm coming up on stitches, where if it was something that had a lot more stitch definition and a lot less, you know, this isn't even that halo-y, it's just enough. I'm still enjoying it, so I'm working on it for this week. And I do believe if I'm using the Selfish Knitter and Crocheter group in Ravelry, their method of just working on this for like, say, a week, and then next week working on one of the other projects that I had on the needles starting at the beginning of the year, and work through that one next week, I think I might start doing that because this is so pay attention-y. So we'll see. I don't know what the less pay attention-y project will be, is that I'll pull up from everything that I want to finish up. So that remains to be seen. So I did not assign the project bags numbers the same way that they do in the group. I'm kind of like half making this up as I go along, sort of using their stuff, sort of using the snowball method of like, there's not that much left, let's just go ahead and finish these. So I am kind of bouncing around a little bit in my technique. Speaking of bouncing around, which I'm not counting this as a cast on. I am only swatching, and that is swatching for the grayling sweater. And so obviously, like, I haven't gotten very far on it. And I decided to do a 4 repeat in the round because the sweater largely is worked in the round in the body. And I figured that will give me the truest sense of my gauge, because I do feel like when I purl, my gauge tightens up a little bit. So I didn't want to keep working back and forth and have an untrue gauge. So I'm just going to play with that for now. And I had heard that as like, hey, just make a bigger thing and, do it in the round. I could have done maybe 2 repeats and put this on like a magic loop or something maybe. I just felt like it's really not going to take that much longer. And then I got this far on it and I went, what actually would have been a good idea, so you can steal this if you like, is if I would have done enough stitches that I could have made like a matching hat or something out of it. I'm not feeling compelled enough to rip this out and make that hat per se, but because I have an abundance of yarn, and we can talk about my silliness on that too, I didn't even know if like customer service would have any way of knowing what dye lot was mailed to me and what dye lot is in the warehouse, because there is a warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, so not terribly far. So except that, now there's weather events and now stuff is still taking longer to ship and, arrive. It was turning into a whole like situation in my mind because I build these things up for no reason. And then I'm like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And I was like, I should see what their return policy is. Just, if I do overorder, how does this work? So they have a very forgiving and relatively simple return policy. And the only caveat is to avoid a restocking fee, you would need to return within 90 days. So now really, I wanted to cast this on. I hadn't done this yet. The original package was still in the mail at this point. So I'm like, okay, I'm thinking in my mind, the best way to solve this is to order the exact amount of yarn that I need for this sweater and then return the original order, and then it'll even out and it'll be fine. So the new yarn comes and I set it aside for a few days and didn't even open it. I'm like, I know it's in there. It's fine. So I go to open it up because, I'm like, okay, I should see what's in there. Also, like, I want to get ready to start on this and start swatching. All of it is all the same dye lot. So I panicked for no reason, but it was a legitimate concern because I've gone to the store and, you only need, say, 3 or 4 balls and you can't find 3 or 4 matching dye lots of, 12 different balls that might be in that bin at the store. It's just a thing that can happen. Also, I know there's some dyers, I want to say it's like the Malabrigos and Madelinetosh's, where there's only a certain number of skeins. I mean, granted, that's a different dye process. It's not the same as something like this, but there's only so many skeins that go into a dye lot. So I wasn't even sure when I ordered the full sweaters quantity if it was all going to be the same dye lot or if I was going to have to like somehow manage the yarn such that it wasn't super obvious, which isn't my favorite thing to do, except that I really want this grayling V-neck sweater and I really wanted it to be in this color. So now I'm in this whole other quagmire of like, I want to try to get as close to being done as possible within 90 days. So if I need to return a quantity, I can do that. No big deal. So now I'm like also justifying in my own brain of like, all right, well, I don't know if this counts towards the 2025 spend budget either, because I would have just bought it all on January 31st if I had just read it properly. So that's another whole judgment call I'm going to have to make at some point. We'll see. And then I'm like, well, now I have like 28. I feel like it's 28 balls of this, all in the same dye lot. Now, I believe it's AKA Nora Knits who is making this into a dress, and I could be wrong. That I know she's making it. I just don't know if she's making it into a dress. And I'm actually behind on episodes because I went back and started watching, and I'm trying to get caught back up. So I'm still a few months behind on, what would be, today's podcast. I'm I don't want it to be a dress length, but I wouldn't mind a tunic length because I realized in one of my clothing declutters, I got rid of stuff that I didn't enjoy anymore, and I don't have any tunics anymore, and I kind of like having a tunic in my wardrobe once in a while, so that may happen. It may not happen. I don't know. I'm also in a quagmire of the sizing in that I've lost 25 pounds, and there's like a size that it wouldn't give the amount of ease that they recommend necessarily, but also I don't want to knit like the next size down. There's enough of a difference in it that I gotta figure it out. I don't know what that's going to look like yet. I just feel like every time I start to like, well, but I'm losing weight and I knit a size down, then, I stop losing weight or something. The one time I didn't do that was for a cardigan. I'm like, nope, I'm knitting it for the size I'm in, and then I lost the weight and it's huge and it's fine. It's a cardigan. So you can just like cozy it up, and now it has moth damage anyway, which actually I do have a solution for. We'll get to that here in a second. A lot has happened since the last time I filmed, which really was a week or two ago. So there's been a lot going on. So all of this to say, I'm going to work on the swatch, see how it blocks out. There is a lot of alpaca in it, and in my experience, alpaca grows like crazy. There is also a pretty substantial amount of nylon in here. I want to say it's 23%, and that gives me hope that it's not just going to be a runaway garment in the blocking, department. So I'm just going to keep working on that for now because this is a thing that's going to take time. I did work on it a little bit, and I'm intentionally setting it down because I think it's easy for me to make these swatches and just assume, well, but my gauge is going to say the same, and it might be pretty similar. I just feel like, especially picking up some of these older projects, I did kind of notice there might be a line where I had to play with it either in blocking or as I'm like, in particular this, as I'm knitting it along, if I see that somewhere, I just kind of like tug the stitches a little bit and try to even it out now as much as possible. And it's not that like it's that far off, it's just enough until my hands get warmed up and everything again. And because this is a larger garment, I do want to give myself those little swatching breaks to make sure it makes sense. Am I making sense on any of this? I know this is like a lot of thought to go into just to swatch and get this thing going. And then I think what I will do is I'm actually kind of liking the fabric where this is right now. And I could probably make it slightly denser. I actually haven't measured it either because that's something I've also done in the past too, where then I will start to measure as I go in my swatch, and then I'm almost like intentionally adjusting, even though that's not realistic to how I would actually knit. So I'm trying to be good and not, necessarily measure as I go and just keep going. I do have a suspicion that the fabric might be a little bit looser of a gauge. So I do have some room to go down, I think. I also haven't measured. And part of that is because this is also considered a bulky weight yarn. And I think that is largely because of the halo, but I do think it is pretty close to an Aran weight. It's not on the higher end of like a chunky or bulky weight yarn. So I think it's going to be fine. I also haven't gotten back to the episodes where Nora talks about what her gauge is with the Wonder Fluff on this sweater. So, and of course we're different people. Coming back to the sweater that I was just talking about, wow, like I'm actually staying on track. My ADHD isn't that bad today. I'm also trying to eat a lot cleaner, which is supposed to help, the brain stuff and the, focus. So, I guess that's finally kicking in that I can have focus. So coming back to the cardigan where there is moth damage, and it's not significant, and also because it is a little bit of a holy design, if I didn't fix it at all, it might be fine and no one would really notice that much, and it's not a big deal. However, I couldn't find leftover scraps or a leftover ball of yarn. And part of why I couldn't find a leftover ball of yarn was because I forgot I had made these socks for beating around the house. And so these have gone through the washing machine. I wasn't trying to be precious with them, even though they are just 100% superwash wool. So they're getting fuzzed and everything like that, which of course the cardigan in my closet has some fuzz because it's been worn and it's been washed at least once, maybe twice. So this is starting to get enough holiness because there's no nylon in here to like help with anything. I don't know if any of the cats had anything to do with it because I was just keeping these in my office. I just happened to come across them in my home office when I was like, oh yeah, I forgot those are down there. I'll pop those on, and then I noticed the holes and I'm like, it's either the fact that I just, threw them right straight in the wash after I found them because I wasn't sure if they were clean or dirty or not. Sorry, but I didn't know. And also, again, because they were on the floor of my office where the cats like to play and screw around, I could easily see them getting a claw in here. And again, there's no nylon. There's nothing in here for structural integrity. So I'm thinking if I come up to the cuff, this yarn actually isn't in that bad of shape. So I might cut some of this yarn out. So I have like a little repair kit for that sweater. We'll see how that goes. That's going to be another fun experiment, not for today, that might actually add a WIP to all of this. It might be a 2026 problem. I don't know. I haven't decided yet because, I kind of made up the rules for my 2025 goals and my WIP-down challenge. So I'm going to make this part up along too because it's a repair, not actually a finishing. It is finishing the repair. It's just, we shall see how far we get. If I had to put any kind of bet on it, and I'm not a gambler by any stretch of the imagination, my assumption is, knowing me, this is going to sit next to the sweater, and it will be around September when it first starts to get chilly, and then I'm like, I kind of want that cardigan, and then I'll repair it. So that's my assumption of what's going to happen. And again, I'm just not going to count that as WIPs. That's a repair because, in my mind earlier this year when I went through all my WIPs, that to me was not a WIP. Even if I would have had the yarn to or remembered that I had somewhere to pull yarn from for the repair, it is a finished object. I can wear it. It's not so holy that it's going to disintegrate on my body. So that's a totally separate effort in my mind. This is a lot, and it's only the middle of January. I think that really does speak to that snowball effect of you get these little wins of okay, finish this thing and then finish this other thing and then, finish all the things and work on finishing other things. And then, in the meantime, if I wanted something totally mindless, it's a dishcloth. So even if I make a mistake, who cares? And, using simple stitches that I don't have to think about too much. Swatching, which I don't count as the cast on. We'll see if I check back in before the end of January. This is a lot. That's where we're at a little bit. I guess it's a little bit past the middle of January. What's today? The 16th, 17th? I don't know what day it is because I was on vacation all week. Anyway, it's still only the middle of January. I can't wait to see how much more stuff I can get done. I also now feel like if I kind of fall out of I don't have the motivation or whatever, I don't feel guilty or anything if I want to take say all of next week off of knitting and crocheting, or there's evenings where I don't feel like it, or I get sucked into other things like editing a video. Because that happens, that is a thing that happens because I'll hyper focus on that for a while. And yeah. Anyway, I will see you later in January. I feel like I saw someone say where doing the swatch, it should be non-negotiable in the sense of why do we crab about it? Why do we have time? Why is it that we don't have time to make a swatch, but we do have the time to make an ill-fitting sweater or one that doesn't fit at all? And I have to say I agree with that. And I guess I forgot this in my unpopular opinions video, which is if you skip the swatch, you don't get to bitch. So that's just my personal feeling on it. We've all learned, you know, lessons of like, oh, I'm just going to throw caution to the wind on something. And this is just not something I'm, at least for a garment, I'm willing to skip, is on the swatching. But anyway, I heard somewhere where doing the swatch is sort of like the first date for that yarn, which I hadn't thought of, but that is actually incredibly insightful. And when you think of it that way, you get the joy and the experience of trying it out for the first time. You get to see how it blocks both in steam and in a full soak. You saw me grab a color catcher, well, a piece of a color catcher because that was excessive. And then, you know, it's hard to tell if the water was looking very teal because, you know, the light's reflecting and it just all looks teal, or if it's actually bleeding. So like that would be super important. So even if I'm only steam blocking, I would want to know if that color has the potential to run or anything on anything else. What if it's raining out? What if any of these other things? Does the color still need to be set with like a vinegar or some sort of an acid? So I just really thought I liked that a lot. That was my first date with this yarn, which is absolutely true. So far, I don't know the negs yet. Like I haven't fully experienced what other people have said are negative. And most of the reviews on Knit Picks for Wonder Fluff are by and large positive. I didn't notice that much shedding personally. I also have cats and often have cat hair on me, so like that probably isn't helping the judgment on that. Like occasionally I would pick off like a definitively teal like little hair, but really I didn't feel like it was excessive or anything. It was just a little bit. And then, well, obviously we'll see how it grows. The only other thing I thought I saw or heard is that Wonder Fluff tends to pill, which obviously I won't know until I give it some wear and everything like that. So I'd also be curious if it's going to like felt up at all, like under the arms or something, which maybe, you know, pilling is sort of like a precursor to felting. So that might be interesting too, because as much as like me, normal, sitting here thinking about laundry, would never dream of putting this sweater like in the washing machine. Have I made mistakes and not noticed like when I grab up a few things and toss them in the laundry? Yes, that has happened before. It's happened to like, usually it's like a concert t-shirt or something that I'm being like extra precious about because like I almost never go to a concert, but then it's like, oh, I don't want it to shrink or like whatever, and I mean to like grab it out before it hits the dryer. So, but I've still forgotten or whatever. But what if I somehow accidentally put it in the washing machine, and or if someday someone's like helping me out or whatever and they just throw it in there without thinking. So I think once I do the full, like the wet block and the soak and everything is dried out, I actually do have a little bit of laundry that I could do today and just toss that in there. Do I want to put it in a lingerie bag? Because if I'm accidentally grabbing it up, I wouldn't accidentally put it in a lingerie bag without noticing. How like, I just want to know how deep do we want to go in on this experiment? Because now that I'm like thinking about like, oh, how do I test it? Not like, okay, if you're going on a first date, you really shouldn't be testing the other person, but you're getting kind of an experience, so might as well like test this relationship. We're pretending it's a relationship now, and okay, you still really shouldn't test other people for the sake of testing it, but because it's only yarn and it's really not that serious, we're gonna put it through all the tests and see what happens, for better or worse. Okay, I don't know how this is picking up, if any, that there is a little bit of greenish runoff, but not enough dye or colorant to show up. I mean, really, if there is any on this color catcher, it's very subtle. And I don't know that I have anything like super white to put it against that's going to show up well. Good to be aware of that it will lose a little bit of the green. I have been working on this gauge swatch off and on for the last actually a little bit over a week or so. So I do actually really need to get going if I want to try to get enough progress in the return window to see if I want to make a tunic length or whatever my plan is or how much yarn I might eat up. I did use 2 different needle sizes, a size 8, which I believe is a 5mm needle, and a 4mm needle up here, the size 6, just to see the difference and to get 2 different baselines for when I block it. And you can see quite a bit of fabric difference, but I did see where Nora said her Wonder Fluff did puff up quite a bit, even with the nylon content in here. So my plan is measure as is, just out of curiosity to see really what the baseline is. And then I'm going to try a steam block and see how much it grows, and then a full-on wet block for if I ever have to fully wash my Grayling V-neck sweater when it's done. So that'll be good to know. But for now, I am going to go ahead and knit up some more and just get enough to see kind of what gauge is going to work best or what fabric I like best. And then if I have to do some math, I'll go from there. So I have the steamer going, or at least heating up, and then just a blocking mat. And then I did put a stitch marker in here when I went to change my needle sizes. So you can see this is a much denser fabric up here. If I went down here, my suspicion is that if this doesn't grow, a size 8 or 5mm hook, 5mm needles would be appropriate. Yeah, just about, because it's supposed to be 4 inches. So basically running from here, like this would be the area across the cable pattern. So if I did an average, it would be about 4 inches across, well, up and down that area. Of course, this is getting sucked in from the smaller needle, but we'll see how much this grows with just steam blocking. And it looks like the steamer is almost ready. Also, I'm not pinning it because I would not pin the sweater out when I block it, so I wanted to have an accurate representation. This definitely was a lot more work for a swatch, but I'm really glad I did it this way. I think it's capturing my true gauge in the round, since most of the sweater will be done in the round. Are you gonna help? And so I'm just doing all of the cable repeats around, getting a really good steam on it. And you can see what a difference it goes from being smushed up and then having the ability to relax when I just lightly spread the cables out a little bit, where before they definitely would have sprung back into place. I am also definitely very happy with how I chose the yarn. I just love how this is turning out. And steaming it really actually is softening an already really soft yarn up. So far, Wonder Fluff, I'm a fan. I did steam it enough that it is slightly damp. So I'm going to go ahead and let this fully, completely dry. Make sure there's no more relaxation that happens here, and then measure again. That didn't take terribly long to dry, and this is actually really telling. So the gauge would be essentially from this purl to this purl, that many stitches. And so coming down here, well, it did start to kind of pull in a little bit. That, I think, is a little bit too loose of a gauge. Also, I want to be comfortable underneath it and not feel too holey, which this really isn't. This would probably be the like loose end of what I would be comfortable wearing without putting something on underneath. It's so hard because it says across the cable pattern 4 inches. And I'm glad I let it dry because the initial, it definitely was too much. So that's just one cable. Let's look at some of the others. So it will, I don't want to say suck back in, but like bounce back in. It does have a little bit of bounce back. That's hard. So we have a few options in this case. We could take the average, which you can kind of see that's sort of what I've been doing. This is a little bit too loose, but I think, you know, at the hem and stuff, that's going to get taken care of with ribbing and everything. This, I think, is really close on an average. This is starting to get a little bit too small. I have not wet blocked it. I was starting to wonder if I would even want to wet block something like this. I don't know. So that's an option. I'm still going to wet block this swatch, just, I guess that's what I meant. I'll still wet block the swatch, but the full sweater, I don't know that I would. So I guess we have a few options. One is I could split the difference and do a size 7, just knee jerk, without doing anything else. I think that would be a reasonable compromise to hit gauge. I believe the pattern called for a size 9 needle, and that's about pretty true to how much I typically go down on needle size for how I typically knit to gauge in general. Because I am a little bit looser, I've had a prior injury, I try not to put too much pressure or strain on my wrists, so I could do that. The other option is I could email the designer, I could do the wet block and make my determination from there. And so since I still intended to do a wet block just to really get a sense of this yarn and see how it blocks out, I'm going to go ahead and get it in the sink to soak with some Eucalyptus, and then also shoot off an email to the designer and ask like exactly where in pattern she measured, because it said in cable pattern, this is the gauge based on this many stitches. And then if, you know, she had somewhere in particular that she measured, or if she did kind of what I was assuming, which is take kind of a running average of where that is on the tape measure, like up and down the cable. So I have those options, and it'll probably take a solid day for that to dry anyway. So I'll give it about 2 days. If I don't hear back from her, then I'll see how the wet block and dry measures out and kind of go from there. Now that it is nearly the end of January, I genuinely don't know what is happening to time, if I'm being totally honest. A few updates are I did reach out through Ravelry. I did go ahead and message the designer for the Grayling V-neck sweater and asked just for a little bit of clarification on where exactly to do the measurements on this. And she was so sweet and so kind that she gave me a few tips. One would be to actually flip it inside out and use these like knit areas as a measuring point. Also, she went ahead and I'm assuming she grabbed her Grayling and measured at different points in the cable and some other tips. So that was so unexpected and so awesome. And she got back to me in less than 24 hours, even though this was still drying. So I wasn't in super that huge of a hurry, but it was also really nice to have a designer that is responsive, because I've had the opposite before and that kind of stinks. After doing a full soak and laying it flat, but not, you know, going crazy with laying it against the blocking mat, I will say, as long as you're not stretching the snot out of it, I feel like there wasn't that much growth. The stitches certainly bloomed and filled in nicely. So I am kind of surprised. I could probably actually go ahead and move forward with the US 8, or I believe it was the 5mm knitting needles. And that's pretty close to what the pattern calls for. And the designer even said, oh, hey, by the way, don't be surprised if you go down in needle size, because I'm a relatively tight knitter. I thought I was relatively loose, so being that close to hers was surprising. The gauge I got with the US 8 is incredibly close. I do feel like the fabric I got for the 6 is just a little bit denser than what I would like. I am slightly tempted to do a quick swatch of a US size 7 needle just to see, but I don't know. Like, this has, like, it's hard to, like, you can't feel this through the television or your phone or whatever, but the drape on this one is actually quite nice. And because the stitches bloomed nicely between steaming it and also the full soak and dry, I don't feel like the fabric is so, I don't want to say see-through, but it did fill in quite nicely with the halo on this yarn. I think it is absolutely gorgeous, so we'll see what February brings. If I just happen to get a bug of going ahead and swatching with the 7 or just, you know, move forward with the 8s. That was a lot for some swatching, and I really did enjoy that perspective of, like, this is your first date with this yarn. I did my laundry and forgot to throw this in there just to see how this would, you know, just fare in the wash if, gosh forbid, I accidentally put it through the washer. But again, I'll have more laundry someday. We can abuse test this a future date and I'll give you an update on it. Other than that, I have made a few more repeats on the pink tweed blanket, but not enough for it to really look any different, so I didn't pull that out. I did make a few more of the Granny Sampler squares. My sizing feels different from square to square, but these do work up relatively quickly, so if I have to change my hook size on any of these and make it work, or, you know, add border to one or two of them, it's not a big deal. I'm not that worried about the perfection on this one. It's just more for the fun of doing a sampler blanket with coordinating colors. So I think that's going to turn out very nicely. And that's about it. I say that's about it, but that was an awful lot for January. So my apologies if some of this got repetitive or really long. But hopefully you got to sit down and enjoy a beverage and a lot of working time on whatever it is that you are knitting or crocheting. And you can tell me all about it down in the comments. If you have questions on anything, please let me know. And are you in the couch? Are you in the couch when you're not supposed to be? Nah. She's at that, like, terrible twos kitten stage that's like, oh, she is something else right now. I swore I would never do a kitten again, and here we are. Anyway, I had so much fun hanging out with you, and I cannot wait to visit with you next time. Bye!